Every great startup begins with a vision, but turning it into success requires a sales team that will grow with you. From hiring your first sales rep to managing a high-performing team at scale, this is the ultimate guide for founders, entrepreneurs, and sales leaders ready to drive serious growth. Expect to go through some salespeople. Expect that they will not all work out. That's very common, and you just can't be afraid of it, because they will find a home that is good for them for a kind of thing that they can sell well. It just might not be with your company. You cannot try to save them all. It is much better to go through multiple people and find that superstar than try to make someone into a superstar. It is too hard, and there's too much on the line to try to take someone who is mediocre and make them a superstar in your context. It is much easier to go through a bunch of them and find one. You're doing them a favor. You're not doing any sales rep a favor by putting them in a situation where they're only going to earn their base salary, or if it's commission only, they're going to earn nothing for a long period of time. You're not doing them a favor by holding on to them. So it's mutually beneficial to do this process. So now let's talk about scale up. Training. Training is always a huge part of this. And when you are in the startup and the grow up phase, as the founder, you should be spending a lot of time listening to calls, doing call breakdowns, all of that kind of thing. Training is always critical. But once you are in the scale-up category and you've got sales management in place, so somebody is supervising the reps and you are no longer daily involved in doing call breakdowns and doing simulations and listening to calls, then you have to make sure that that is a core part of what your sales management is doing. Second thing is to track numbers daily, weekly, and monthly. The more infrastructure you have in sales, the easier it is to do this. And this also goes back to having a sales ops person who can surface this information for you, and you'll have a lot of metrics around that. One thing that's really important, and I talk about this in my book, which is that I made a mistake in not watching time to close metrics. I was watching all of the close metrics of like how many prospects turned into leads, marketing qualified leads, how many marketing qualified leads turned into sales qualified leads, and that's, if this is all Greek to you, I'll do another video on that. Sales qualified leads, how many sales qualified leads turned into sales appointments, how many appointments turned into a close. So I was measuring all those things. One thing that people forget to manage is time to close. So that is how much time it takes from when someone enters your universe to when they actually just close or don't close. So they end up in close or in long-term follow-up. And the reason for that is you can make changes in your sales process that significantly affect how long it takes to close someone. And I had done that, actually. I changed some of my lead magnets, in other words, the marketing that I was doing to get leads in there, and I was getting more leads. And I thought that was great, because if all the percentages flowed down, it would work. And the percentages seemed to be flowing down, but it was actually attracting people who were slightly less interested. And so it was increasing time to close. And so what you don't necessarily realize, if you're not watching time to close, it can be extremely expensive because you're paying for the marketing dollars up front, whether that is paid marketing of one sort or another, or you're going outbound with your SDRs and they're doing outbound outreaches. That money gets spent now. And then if the time to close is really long, you're not going to get the cash from that expenditure for a longer period of time. So we always think about compressing the cash cycle. And this is one of those things that sales teams and founders who haven't done this before often miss, is that it matters how long it takes from each step. So I don't want to beat the horse to death, but I do want you thinking about time to close. It matters. Track it. 2 worksheets for you that you can click on. One is the When Should I Hire worksheet. When you click on it, it'll ask you, do you want to make a copy? And you will make your very own copy right here by clicking on that. And When Should I Hire? It's a calculator. You enter your annual salaries of SDRs, AEs, how many leads are generated by them, average sales value, and then how many sales will they generate. And it will give you a box here, which could be green or not green, depending on whether you should hire. So it'll give you a recommendation. So that is a very important thing to know, when you should hire. So it'll give you all the numbers. But remember, I told you earlier, you need to know your numbers. You need to know how many leads you could generate and the conversion rate. And the only way you're going to know that is by thinking through you having multiple hats before you hire. Or if you're a lucky person and you're coming to us with a sales department already in place, you just need to get these numbers if you don't have them already. The other thing that I have for you is the example AE sales tracker. This is actually a redacted copy of an actual one that I used. And so you can use this in multiple formats. But there's a section at the top for wins, lost, CBQs, check back quarterly, in process, how many calls they made, how many appointments were created. So I like doing this in multiple places. There is a CRM. We always had a CRM. But I also like surfacing this on a document like this because we've got the data for the just closed week, and then we made them do a plan for the upcoming week. All right. So the data for the upcoming week was how many sales calls are on the calendar for as of Monday, and we made them put that. So every week they're just filling this in for the just closed week, and they talk about how many they have on the calendar, so we have an idea of their capacity, and then they've got a call plan. So down here, there's a call plan. How many calls are they going to make? So having a document like this that you just look at, and you can sit down with a rep certainly at the once a week, and then on a daily basis, well, how many appointments did you create? What were the disposition of those appointments? So you can see a lot of information in your CRM, but especially for a lot of smaller companies, you might be using a more lightweight CRM. You might not have all these bells and whistles. So a simple sheet like this is a focusing and clarifying thing, because now you can go back and you can say, okay, well, on weeks when in this case, the AE had 6 on the calendar, let's look at this trend here. Sales appointments for the upcoming week. So for these middle weeks here, she had 6 on the calendar, but then it went to 4 and 3 and 3 and 2. Now, well, what else is happening here? Oh, okay, well, let's see. It's around Thanksgiving time, so clearly there's a dip around Thanksgiving time. Maybe that accounts for it. Or do we need to look at her activity metrics and say, okay, how many calls did she make? Well, let's see. In this week, at the just closed week, she made 69 calls and then 87. So you can look here and start to see things week by week that you wouldn't see if you didn't do this. So I strongly encourage you to take this, use this, make your own, what have you, but you need to be tracking this number. Okay, so that's the Wench.Hire. That's a sample rep activity tracker. So now let us turn to building a superstar team. All right, so what should you hire for? This is really important because sales gets a reputation of you're hiring for a slick person. I don't believe that. I believe that sales is hiring listeners. And sometimes the quietest folks are these secret killers because they are truly actively listening to the prospect. And they're saying back to the prospect what they've just heard. They're reiterating it. So the prospect has said something, and the rep is actively listening and then repeats back to the prospect what they just heard. And then after that goes on and the prospect really feels heard and understood, then they start to map what the offer is to what the prospect truly needs. And that is far more powerful than someone who might be slick looking, but isn't really listening. They're more talking. That is a very different kind of rep, and in my view, a less effective one. Another bullet point, if you've got a senior hire, particularly if you're hiring for sales management, it's awesome if they teach you something you didn't know during the interview process. Because if you're a founder, unless you've had training in sales, then you don't necessarily know best practices in sales. So if you've got some aha moments of how you're interviewing them and the sales management person is telling you, well, the first thing I would do is this. And you're like, wow, I never thought of that. That's a really good sign. Now, do you know if that's the right way to do it or not? No, not necessarily. But they're bringing to the table actively how they would approach the problem. And you can investigate in the interview process, how are they thinking about it? And you can ask things like, well, how would you measure that? What does success look like? What would the team then look like? How would you grow the team? And so if you're learning things during the interview process about how they think and things about how they approach the organization of the sales team, that's a good sign. Skills development, super important for a superstar team. Record every call that you can. Do call breakdowns. And that is call breakdowns for calls that went well and that didn't go well. So I had a library. I recorded everything. And I had a library of good and bad sales calls. And I did commentary on it, and I recorded it as a curriculum. So a new rep came on board, and they had 2 weeks in which they were not only learning the product, but they were listening to sales calls, which had me kind of stopping. It was a recording, and I would listen to it, and I would stop, and I would comment on it. So they would first learn the product. They would learn the sales scripts. Then they would listen to a sales call that I had done or one of the other reps had done, and then my commentary on top of that. And that was a really good baseline, a foundation to the learning. But the real kicker is doing breakdowns on their own calls. All right. So role playing, how would you handle this situation? And then doing a breakdown of their call. What are some other ways that you could have done this? And then also, did you adhere to the script? Why or why not? And making it a very intentional process instead of a process by which the rep just shows up and is like, well, didn't close that one. Well, that shouldn't end it there. Right? Well, why didn't it close? We need to do an AAR, an after action review on why didn't it work. This is the only way that you're going to help them get better and help them adapt to how the marketplace is changing, to how what customers are hearing out there, and how your products are changing, and how you're making sure you're getting a superstar. Because otherwise you can get someone who just, you're not sure, well, is it just a dip because it's, as I mentioned earlier, it's Thanksgiving time, there's a dip. Or are they getting lazy? Or is the product not really fitting the market anymore? And you could have a sales rep that's just sitting on your roster, underperforming for a long period of time because you haven't dug in and really understood. Is it actually what's going on the calls, or is it something else? So definitely do that. It'll take a ton of time. It is worth it. And here's the last bullet point. If a rep isn't working in 60 days, let them go and move on. And you have to be clinical about this. They don't get better. There's a honeymoon phase, and as entrepreneurs, we're often eternal optimists, and we always want to think it can work out, and we always want to think that we can save them, and we want to think that we can fix it. This is one of those times, which I mentioned earlier, where it's probably best not to make it work out because the costs are too high. If you are keeping a underperforming sales rep, they're not making their commissions, they're not earning what they could earn at a different organization where they might be successful. You are not doing them a favor. You're not doing yourself a favor because you're burning money and you're burning time. The video you just saw is just a segment of the full guide that shows you how to build a successful sales team using strategies from businesses making over $10 million in revenue. To watch the full video, just click right here.